November 20th, 2019 afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Welcome, everyone. Hello, Carla. Could you please call the roll?
Yes, Udaly.
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish. Hardesty.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. And now we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon, Robert.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you very much. Carla, could you please read item number 1082?
Readopt remanded ordinance number 188142 to restrict bulk fossil fuel terminals.
Colleagues, fossil fuels are a dual threat to our community. They're the primary component of carbon emissions that threaten our planet, and they're a safety threat to our community, especially in the event of a major Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, which geologists say is not a matter of if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. As we work to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, the first step we need to take is to ensure that the situation doesn't get any worse. Continuing to allow new fossil fuel terminals increases the risk to the surrounding industrial district, the Willamette River, and indeed our entire city. By allowing more terminals, we undermine our local and global efforts to transition off the fossil fuels that cause climate change. Reducing our reliance on fossil fuels will take a concerted effort at the local level, in the region, by the state of Oregon, and by our federal government. City Council previously adopted this ordinance back in 2016. Since that time, it's been appealed to the Oregon Supreme Court, and now it's back before us. While we recognize that there are other measures that need to be taken, and we intend to bring those forward in 2020, it's imperative that we readopt this package now without any further amendments to have the code go into effect without any further delay. Future amendments and actions will require Planning Commission review. City staff have already been researching a planning for the future ordinance, which is part of our larger action plan to address fossil fuels in Portland. Andrea Durbin, Director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, will give us an overview of that work. Tom Armstrong from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability will give us an overview of the ordinance, since only two of us, Commissioners Fritz and Commissioner Fish, who wanted to be here today, but extends his regrets. Only two of them were on the council when these changes were originally adopted. Good afternoon, Director Durbin.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, City Council.
I'm sorry, I had a note and I forgot it. Commissioner Fritz wanted to make a few statements up front. I apologize, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. I was really proud to co-sponsor this when it was here in December of 2016, and so on behalf of Commissioner Fisher and myself, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming back again and thank the staff for getting this back to us. If ever there was a time that I would have liked to do a land acknowledgement, this is one of them. Our tribal Director Laura John has asked us not to do a land acknowledgement until we've done the necessary research to decide what the language should be. So I thought a fitting substitute would be the words of Greta Thunberg. Our house is on fire. I am here to say our house is on fire. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes. In that time, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society need to have taken place, including a reduction of our carbon dioxide emissions by at least 50%. And please note that these numbers do not include the aspect of equity, which is absolutely necessary to make the Paris Agreement work on a global scale. Nor does it include tipping points or feedback loops like the extremely powerful methane gas released from the thawing Arctic permafrost. People like to tell success stories, but their financial success has come with an unthinkable price tag. And on climate change, we have to acknowledge that we have failed. All political movements in their present form have done so, and the media has failed to create broad public awareness. We are at a time in history when everyone with any insight of the climate crisis that threatens our civilization and the entire biosphere must speak out in clear language, no matter how uncomfortable and unprofitable that may be. We must change almost everything in our current societies. The bigger your carbon footprint, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is.
Thank you. Director Durbin.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Andrea Durbin, Director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Mayor, as you've stated, fossil fuel operations pose a significant threat to the health of our community. We have heard from the public, community members, youth advocates, that reducing the risks and improving community safety is critically important, as is transitioning away from our fossil fuels dependence towards cleaner fuels. Before we walk through the zoning amendments today, I'd like to update you on the other work that the city is doing to address fossil fuels that will be coming before the council next year. BPS has been working closely with several other bureaus, including the Portland Bureau for Emergency Management, the City Attorney's Office, Bureau of Development Services, and Portland Fire and Rescue. Reducing the risks posed by these operations in a liquefaction zone and providing the community with more information is one of our priorities. To that end, we appreciated the City Council contributed funding to PBEM in the fall bump process to join with Multnomah County to research the economic and environmental impacts of a seismic disaster specific to the critical energy infrastructure hub, as well as research risk bonding options to support response, cleanup, and remediation. We expect this study to be done next year, providing important information for both the city and the county to determine the best ways forward to mitigate risks. PBEM is also developing a proposal for City Council consideration next year to adopt seismic upgrade requirements for storage tanks in Portland's critical energy infrastructure for safety and resiliency, and also to strengthen community right-to-know and pre-notification requirements for the receipt and storage of fossil fuels and other hazardous materials in Portland. PBEM Director Mike Myers will be joining the invited testimony later, and he can answer any questions that you have specific to the work that they are leading. It's also important to quicken the transition to cleaner fuels, including the electrification of the transportation sector, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. To that end, BPS will propose an ordinance scheduled for December 18th to move implementation of the renewable fuel standards from BDS to BPS so that we can start the update for the renewable fuel standards to help transition more quickly to cleaner fuels. We expect to do this work next year. BPS is also working with BDS and PBOT to explore local options for electric vehicle charging. We know that we need to make it easier for people to charge their electric vehicles at home and work to encourage more adoptions of electric vehicles. And finally, we are working to place limits and restrictions on the expansion of fossil fuel operations in Portland. That is in part what you will be hearing about today. But what you will consider today is just the first phase of the zoning work. As the mayor mentioned, because today's zoning amendment is not as comprehensive as we need to reduce the risks posed by these operations, we intend to work on Phase 2 zoning process and bring that back to council next year. For example, we will need an additional ordinance to address offloading and transloading facilities. Public testimony today will likely raise concerns and suggestions for what we might consider in this Phase 2 process of the fossil fuel zoning policies, to ensure that Portland has a more comprehensive and protective zoning provisions in place that reduces the risks, improves safety, and better protects the health of our communities. With that broader context for the work that's currently underway, I will now introduce Tom Armstrong, who's a Planning and Sustainability Supervising Planner, to brief you on this zoning amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Tom Armstrong from BPS. I have a presentation, but the projector isn't working, so you have a printout. We've distributed printouts through the audience so that they can follow along as well, and it has been posted to the project website, so people can download it as well. Starting on slide 2, there is a map of the existing terminals in Portland. All of these are located in what we call the Northwest Industrial District, stretching along the river out past the St. John's Bridge. There are 11 fossil fuel terminals. 10 of them are focused on petroleum fuels and products, and one natural gas storage facility that really manages the regional peak consumption in the wintertime. These fossil fuel terminals handle over 90% of the fossil fuels that serve Oregon and are sold in Oregon. And it really is it's often referred to as the critical energy infrastructure hub, because you have a confluence of the river access, the freight routes, the rail access, and the pipeline access, because almost all of our fuel comes from the refineries up in Puget Sound. Most of it comes via pipeline, the Olympic pipeline down Washington, and that main pipeline ends in the Portland Harbor area and serves these terminals. On page 3 is the policy direction that we had that guided us in how we constructed these zoning amendments. First, the council adopted a resolution in November 2015 to actively oppose the expansion of infrastructure that was primarily for transporting or storing fossil fuels in or through Portland. And then the second policy direction was in 2016, as part of the comprehensive plan, we adopted a policy to limit the fossil fuel storage facilities to those necessary to serve the regional market. And I will get in a little bit later as to what that actually means. On slide 4 is a map that was prepared by DOGAMI, the State Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, I think that's what that stands for, that shows the probability of liquefaction and as you can see, in the red areas, that really covers almost all of Portland's industrial districts. And that's why these zoning code amendments apply to all of our industrial and employment zones, and not just some sort of overlay that applies to the Northwest Industrial District. So on page 5, we get into the zoning code amendments. And this package, what we did is we defined what we mean by a bulk fossil fuel terminal. And that is a larger facility that really handles or does what we call transloading. So we're they move the product from one type of transportation mode, pipeline, barge, rail, to another type of transportation mode. Most of this comes in via pipeline and barge and goes out to the rest of Oregon and Southwest Washington via truck. There's a smaller pipeline that serves the Willamette Valley down to Eugene. Once we've defined that use, then we regulate it. And what we've essentially done is prohibited all new terminals in all of the zones in Portland. And then we've designated the existing fossil fuels as a limited use. And designating it as a limited use allows it to continue to operate, continue to make seismic upgrades. The only thing they can't do is expand the storage tank capacity from what they have today. In the ordinance, there are a few minor technical changes that we made because since 2016, when these amendments were originally adopted, the zoning code, there have been subsequent amendments to the zoning code, and so we've made some adjustments to realign it and reconcile it with those changes that have been made over the last 3 years. Slide 6 is an important concept. The way these regulations are structured is, and we know out there on these terminals that they have a mix of older tanks. I think the last tank out there was built in 2012. And the way the regulations have been structured is that the terminals do have the option of replacing their storage capacity. So that if they want to take down some smaller tanks and consolidate that and put that same amount of storage capacity into a larger tank that is built to current seismic codes, they can do that. And that's one way that we think that we've allowed those terminals to continue to operate and eventually, hopefully, invest in their facilities to make them safer. On slide 7 is the new use category that I talked about. A bulk fossil fuel terminal has that multimodal access. I think what we're trying to do there is distinguish it between, oftentimes, the gasoline will come into these 10 terminals that handle it and go out to other trucks. They may have an intervening distribution facility before it goes out to the retail outlets. If it's coming in by truck and out by truck, that's not covered by these regulations. We also, last time around in 2016, when we adopted this, we included exclusions for airports and marine and rail service facilities. So if at the airport, for example, there's fuel storage, for jet fuel storage, and in the port and at the rail yards, there's fuel depots that are not included in these regulations. On slide 8 is the definition of what is a fossil fuel. And we carefully worded this definition specifically to not include new renewable fuels, such as renewable biodiesel and other renewable additives, such as ethanol, that are going to be needed and used to transition us off of fossil fuels. And so we wanted to make that distinction there. As has been stated on slide 9, this was appealed to LUBA and then to the Court of Appeals and eventually to the Oregon Supreme Court. It has come back down to us. There were 2 errors that were sustained through that whole process. There were 3 errors actually. 2 of them are relevant today. The first error is there is the Giles Lake Industrial Sanctuary Plan, which was actually adopted way back in 2001. The first time around, we did not address those policies, and so in the policy findings today with this ordinance, we have done that. LUBA faulted us around not having enough evidence or discussion about addressing the future demand for fossil fuels and how we weigh cargo forecasts versus other consumption forecasts and trends. And I'll talk about a little bit of those today. The third issue is LUBA found that we didn't adequately address an objective in the old comprehensive plan, but subsequently we adopted a new comprehensive plan with new policies that we're evaluating this proposal against, and so that remand issue has become moot because that policy is no longer in effect. On slide 10, the Giles Lake Industrial Sanctuary Plan applies to that Northwest Industrial District along the river. It was adopted in 2001. It was designed to limit uses, further limit uses in that industrial area to preserve it as an industrial sanctuary. Many of those use limits have been incorporated into our new prime industrial overlay zone that was adopted with the comp plan. And that, these amendments really only apply to one type of use in that area. And that I think the higher level or the more important issue is we are not changing the map, the zoning map. We're keeping our same industrial base. We are not regulating other industrial uses in that area. And so we think we've made findings that show that we are consistent with the Giles Lake plan policies. On slide 11, as I mentioned before, we have a new policy around fossil fuel distribution, and that it seeks to limit those facilities to those necessary to serve the regional market. And that's the key phrase, is for you to decide what is necessary and what is the regional market. On page 12, it really is sort of, again, the regional market, as we've recommended that you find and defined, really is the state of Oregon, because we are that gateway hub from the petroleum refineries up in Puget Sound. We also we recognize that we serve Southwest Washington as well. Unfortunately, the data that is available doesn't allow us to parse it below the state level. So we think that just limiting it to the state of Oregon is close enough and good enough for defining the regional market under this comprehensive plan policy. So what are we going to need? What's going to be necessary to serve the region? On slide 13 is information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Every year they produce what's called the Energy Outlook, Annual Energy Outlook. This is a chart from the 2019 version where they project out for the nation what they think the demand for petroleum and other liquids will be out to 2050. And they go through a number of scenarios, and we've focused here on the reference case. And what that essentially says for the nation, they expect it to be flat in terms of the amount of petroleum that will be consumed in the nation. So that's sort of one forecast of what we're going to need in the future. I think what they find is there's increasing energy efficiency across all of the end users. But again, unfortunately, in this instance, they do not break it down to the state level. So we have this forecast at a national level, but there's nothing to indicate that Oregon would be any different than the national. On slide 14, is state level data. This is looking back at what the trends have been since 1990. And again, this comes from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. The top line is total petroleum fuel consumption, and we've broken out some subcategories that account for most of that, which is gasoline is the uppermost of those lower lines. The next one is distillate fuel oil or diesel fuel. And the bottom one is aviation and jet fuel. And then on slide 15 shows why these lines are relatively flat when we have a growing population and a growing economy, and that's because fuel efficiency and per capita consumption has been going down over this period. And so as we've grown in the number of end users, the amount per person has dropped, and so that allows these lines to be flat over that time where we've had a lot of growth. The one state forecast that we have on consumption side comes from ODOT and their projections for gas tax revenue out into the future. This one is was done this year, goes out to the year 2029, and they are projecting a flat or lower in terms of the number of gallons of gas that they expect to be consumed and generate gas tax revenue.
What does, with or without conditional, what does that mean?
So when they passed, my understanding is when they passed the state legislation to raise the gas tax, it's at 2 steps. So they immediately implemented a 4-cent gas tax, and there's another 6 cents bump if certain conditions are met. But if you look, those 2 lines line up exactly the same. So whether or not those conditions, whether it goes from 4 cents or 10 cents, ODOT's saying that price indicator isn't enough to really change the amount of gas that gets consumed, and they're both down from where it is today.
And is that what we've found in Portland since we've had the gas tax, that it hasn't really affected how much people drive?
I do not know that, but I can check with PBOT on what they've seen in terms of
Interested to
the
know. Thank you.
gas tax revenue. So on slide 17, what was opposite of this, showing flat or declining consumption in the future, are a series of cargo forecasts that really look at the types of cargo flowing through the Portland harbor, and this is both Port of Portland facilities as well as the private facilities. And this is really what LUBA found us, not clearly addressing last time, is how do you reconcile these other consumption forecasts with the cargo forecasts? And the cargo forecasts, there's been a number of them over the last 8 years. They are sort of declining in terms of the amount of growth that they're projecting. And these rates are for what we call liquid bulks, which is primarily petroleum fuel and some other materials, but most of it is petroleum products. I would say the 2011 Oregon Freight Plan really reach back, and if you dig into the numbers, it's based on 2002 federal data, so it's getting pretty old when you look at that. ODOT did an update of the freight plan in 2017. They did not update this forecast as part of that. It was mostly a policy update. We had some studies done 2012 as related to the West Hayden Island study at that time that, and that study was really significant in that, they projected a 0.7% annual growth rate. Also, those studies found that even at that growth rate out to 2035, there was enough capacity in the system to accommodate that growth. So again, it calls into question how much additional capacity we're going to need in the future. The other balance to this is on page 18, and I think we'll hear in testimony today, a series of other policy initiatives that haven't been factored into these consumption trends fully yet, or the forecasts that really look at reducing fossil fuel use. And, it is at the state level with ODOT and DEQ programs, It's at the regional level with Metro and their Climate Smart Communities program, and it is at the city level with our Climate Action Plan and our Transportation System Plan. They're all looking to bend that consumption curve and reduce the consumption of gasoline. On page 19, I think where we're at in the findings and looking at the comp plan policy as a whole is that there is a wide range of policies that we have to balance when making these decisions. I think that this ordinance does that in terms of when you look at the policies that talk about reducing risk from natural hazards, including earthquakes. We have, again, as we've just gone through, limiting fossil fuel terminals to what is existing is likely to be what is necessary to serve the regional market when you look at all of these trends and forecasts. And then finally, we're doing it in a way that maintains our economic base in our industrial sanctuaries. This is one use out of many. The other industrial uses the regulations do not change for them as part of this. Finally, I want to note in your packet, and again posted to our website, we have one technical amendment that we would like put on the table. They're in this, as part of this original adoption, we had a neighborhood contact. And this speaks to some of our other actions about right to know, in that in the future, if any of these terminals come in for new storage capacity, whether that's to replace and reconfigure their existing capacity, or for non-fossil fuels, or for aviation fuels, they need to notify the neighborhood ahead of time. There's a whole series of regulations about how they do that, so that there is advance notice and a community dialogue about what they're doing, why they're doing it, so everybody understands what is going on, which is not what happens today.
Are there any questions on the technical amendment proposed by BPS? Can I get a motion?
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Hardesty, second from Commissioner Fritz.
Are there any other questions about this amendment package?
Call the roll on the amendment.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty? Wheeler?
Aye, the amendment's adopted. All right, so we are moving on to the exciting part of the program. That's the public testimony phase. So we're going to be opening up the floor to testimony on the fossil fuels terminal zoning ordinance and the draft amendments. We would like to start with the invited testimony portion of the hearing. We have a few special guests with us today, and we're greatly appreciative of their presence. Multnomah County Commissioner Sushila Jayapal is here today. It's good to see you again.
Here.
Asia Dakota from the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission has joined us today. Thank you for being here today. And of course, Mike Myers, the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management Director. Thanks all three of you for being here today.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor and
you,
Commissioners. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Sushila Jayapal. I am the Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2, which represents North and Northeast Portland, and includes the neighborhood of St. John's and other North Portland neighborhoods that are right across the bridge, right across the river from the critical energy infrastructure hub. I'm really here to thank you for the action that you've taken today and for your partnership with the county in matters relating to the hub and to fossil fuel infrastructure. The first step to getting out of a hole is to stop digging it deeper. That's what today's action by the council does. It prevents the further development of fossil fuel infrastructure. We can no longer afford fossil fuel infrastructure in our community. We can't afford it because if we hope to prevent climate collapse, we must move away from the fossil fuel economy with both speed and urgency. To do that, we have to stop investing in 20th century sources of energy, embrace 21st century renewable energy resources, and manage the responsible transition away from the fossil fuel economy. In addition to the climate crisis, as you've heard, as we know, we have another reason to act. The critical energy infrastructure hub that's being regulated with today's council action is built in the worst place imaginable, next to the river, near neighborhoods and homes, on soils that will liquefy and spread when the earthquake arrives. The CEI hub has 360 million gallons of storage tank capacity. Most of that capacity is in tanks that were built before we knew about the risks of earthquakes in our region, and those tanks won't survive an earthquake. For comparison, the Exxon Valdez spilled 11 million gallons of oil. And closer to home, we saw a small preview of what could happen at a tank farm when 2 storage tanks at a New Star facility in California burst into flames and released a cloud of choking black smoke because of the suspected impact of a small earthquake. The commitment of the City of Portland, today's action, is a testament to our community's resolve to address these difficult threats to our safety and to the safety of future generations. Today's action, combined with the ongoing partnership between the county and the city to address risk from the CEI hub, is a step in the right direction. It's one of many steps in our journey out of the hole that we are in, an ecological and emergency preparedness crisis caused by the fossil fuel industry. We need to stop digging ourselves further into that hole and start climbing out. This is happening here in Portland and Multnomah County because we have the community's resolve and support. And it will happen across the country because we have no choice but to act boldly, bravely, and with urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jayapal, for being here today. We appreciate your leadership, and we appreciate the partnership with Multnomah County. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, members of City Council. It's a pleasure to be here today amongst you and also amongst this panel of distinguished folks. My name is Asia Dakota. I am a citizen of the Yakima Nation. I also serve as the Watershed Department Manager for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, who represent the Lower Columbia River Treaty Tribes, who have reserved rights throughout the Columbia River Basin. The Columbia River is the lifeblood of this region, supporting a rich and diverse ecosystem that has molded the cultures, diets, and religions of the tribes since time immemorial. In the past 200 years, the Columbia River and this region has changed dramatically, and not always for the best for the resources that it supports. The tribes are on the front lines when it comes to bearing the burdens of climate change, having already begun experiencing changes to our first foods, the salmon, the game, the roots, and the berries. For us, these natural resources are our cultural resources. The Columbia River and its fishery resources are battling impacts from development and pollution. Tribal fishers in the Columbia face even larger risks and potential impacts. In addition to our diets rich in fish, we spend much of the year outside where we are exposed to the air and the water in and along the river. The tribes and the railroads have a long and complicated relationship. Trains run along both sides of the Columbia River, impeding tribal fishers' access to fishing sites and creating risks of accidents. The recent escalation in hauling fossil fuels by unit trains alarmed our tribal members, not only because of the increased risk of harm to them, but also because of the increased risk of what is often called a low probability, high consequence accident. A spill of any type of crude, be it heavy tar or light Bakken, will have significant and long-term impacts to the aquatic resources of the river. We learned this lesson from the Exxon Valdez spill 25 years ago. Despite a quarter century, Alaskans still find oil residue on the beaches and under rocks. The 2016 Mosier crude trail derailment, fortunately, did not involve a devastating spill into the river. However, it woke the region up to the potential of a major catastrophe. There were many lessons learned from the spill, but the primary lesson is we must protect the river at all costs. With the current legal landscape, we cannot totally prohibit trains laden with fossil fuels from traveling through the gorge. However, we can do our part to reduce the need to have them in the first place. We support the City of Portland's recent resolutions opposing coal trains and curtailing the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure as first steps to addressing climate change and protecting the environment. We fully support ordinance number 188142. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dakota. We appreciate it very much. Thanks for your leadership. Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Mike Myers. I'm the Director of the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. I have worked as a firefighter, a fire chief, and emergency manager for over 30 years. I've seen a lot of disasters, both large and small. Not much phases me, to be honest. I'm not a nervous guy. But what I do worry about is the CEI hub. The concentration of the state's fuel storage tanks in such a perfectly bad location, on liquefiable soils, in a 500-year floodplain, next to the urban wildland interface, with very limited ingress and egress, could hardly be worse. In a major earthquake, the CEI hub poses a grave threat to the safety of the surrounding community. It also threatens our environment and the economy on a scale that is difficult to imagine. A major disaster at the CEI hub could hamper life-saving response actions and delay needed assistance by weeks and months due to fuel shortages. Meanwhile, that spilled fuel could poison the Columbia River all the way to its mouth. Together, these impacts would economically cripple our state. It is for that reason that I am focused on efforts to decrease the vulnerability of the CEI hub. My colleague, Andrea Durbin, has already mentioned that I intend to propose seismic upgrade requirements for tanks. I very much look forward to bringing this to you, the Council, in 2020. But in the meantime, the first step to improving safety in the CEI hub is to stop making it bigger. The code changes proposed today prevent the expansion of fuel storage in location that should never have been used for fuel storage in the first place. At the same time, it permits equipment replacements and upgrades that increases safety, and that is a good thing. I'm happy to support the work of our partners at BPS in taking this important step to increase the disaster resilience of the city and our state. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it very much. Thanks, all three of you, for being here today. All right, so now we're going to open this up to public testimony. Carla, Board Clerk is going to read the names of people in the order in which they signed up. However, if you have a disability, or if you have small children, or if there are other pressing circumstances that require you to be moved up in the line, please let Carla know, and we will accommodate you. She'll read 3 names. If people could come up, the microphones slide around, and we find about 6 inches is about the right distance. There are about 16 people signed up now, so we can give 3 minutes for each person to testify. I would ask that as your testimony comes to an end and the buzzer goes off, if you could please stop your testimony. You have 3 minutes, but there's a lot of people who do want to speak. So without further ado, Carla, could you please read the first 3?
Yes, the first 3, please come on up, are Mario Majares, Kathy Sampson Cruz, Elijah Cedas, and they'll be followed by Kelly O'Hanley, Ella Schreiner, and Violet O'Haron.
Welcome, thank you. Name for the record, we do not need your address unless you want to give it to us for some reason. If you'd like to start, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mario Mijares, organizer for Columbia Riverkeeper. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on today's very important gathering. We strongly support the implementation of Portland's landmark fossil fuel zoning code ordinance. We know that city staff have provided information that resolves the few outstanding issues that Oregon's Land Use Board of Appeals has identified. We support the policy as it is proposed and as it was approved in 2016. It's an important step in preventing the fossil fuel industry from expanding their shipment of toxic fossil fuels. Fossil fuels pose major risks to the health and safety of nearby neighborhoods, communities on oil train routes, and downriver towns that rely on the Columbia River for drinking water. These recent events highlight some of the risks. In September, an LPG train car struck the ongoing bridge onto Swan Island, causing more than $1 million in damage and impacting traffic in and out of Swan Island. This event could have been much worse if the LPG rail car had ruptured and burned. In October, a New Star tank explosion rocked a refinery complex in Crockett, California, collapsing fuel tanks, closing I-80, and releasing plumes of toxic smoke. It's possible that this fire and tank farm failure resulted from a 4.5 magnitude earthquake, a small fraction of the seismic risks we face here in our region. Those are only 2 incidents that demonstrate the level of impact and the risk of gambling the safety of people and environment. the community is more motivated than ever to support the city's ordinance. We look forward to the council's vote to readopt the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments as written and to put this important policy into effect. We also look forward to working with the city to continue to develop proactive policies to address the health, safety, and environmental risks associated with fossil fuel infrastructures.
Thank you. We appreciate your support. Thank you. Thanks for your hard work. Good afternoon.
Hi. Just need to stand for a moment.
Please.
I in me, manaimu she kukna shwa pina klausha mechsinwit. I weausach I katsiayo pusha I katsiayo katla. So in my native Walla Walla Wallulapum language, I say Sheikh Pachwe, good day. My Wallulapum name is Wayausuks, Kathy Sampson Cruzy. I'm an enrolled member of the Walla Walla tribe, the Cayuse, and the Umatilla in Eastern Oregon. My parents are Otway Carl Sampson, Chief Yellowbird, and Marion Arlita Sampson. I'm not an elected leader, but I am an elder now. I'm on the board of the Columbia Riverkeeper in Hood River and the advisory board of the Civil Liberties Defense Center in Eugene, Oregon. My husband and I have 8 children, 12 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. I have lived many places in my life, from our Umatilla Indian Reservation to the Yukon-Kuskokwim village of Bethel, Alaska. In the early 1970s, I lived across the river northeast. I commuted to Portland State University. I have returned to support my daughter, who is attending OHSU. I enjoy the parks and the walks near the Willamette River with my granddaughter, Juniper. I was raised, as my ancestors were, to cherish Mother Earth, all that she provides our people, and all the creatures living on and with her. In return, we have always been taught to respect and protect Mother Earth, the land, the air, and the water. This is the balance of things that has allowed us to live on this land for all generations before. A new threat is upon us. The rapid growth and execution of plans for Northwest expansion of fossil fuel infrastructures, small modular nuclear reactors, and the devastation of coal and fracked gas exploration. I was here in 2016 before you. I'm going to continue my pleas for us to move past our dependence on King Kong, the coal, the oil, the nuclear, and the frack gas, which is nothing natural about frack gas. Be it solar, wind, net zero homes, and listening to indigenous wisdom for sustainable solutions, hand in hand with scientific wisdom for a just transition to a clean energy and a livable planet. A new attack on Mother Earth must be stopped. I stand with all who joined this fight, so I ask you to be on the right side of history. Be the wisdom keepers for the city of Portland, the entire state of Oregon, and the Northwest communities will follow your lead. Be the ones who look 7 generations ahead. Protect your community, protect the rivers, and the beauty our Mother Earth has given us. Vote in full support of the fossil fuel zoning ordinance. Kwalisam Chana, we are here forever. Aye.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Is this close enough?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Greetings, Commissioners. My name is Elijah Cetus, and I'm the grassroots organizer with Center for Sustainable Economy here in Portland. We support the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments in their present form, and we see them as an integral part of an eventual managed decline of fossil fuel infrastructure in Portland, coinciding with a deep reinvestment in our communities in cleanup, restoration, and resiliency. The passage of this ordinance in 2016 was a remarkable moment in Portland history when grassroots activists, city staff, and elected officials responded to a crisis and decided that large-scale fossil fuel infrastructure expansion would no longer be legal here. The fossil fuel industry and local business advocacy organizations, like the Portland Business Alliance, saw their power threatened and sued the city. Having been thoroughly defeated in the court of popular opinion, they turned to their high-priced lawyers and sought to defeat the amendments in the court of law. Nevertheless, the city largely prevailed, and the remand process before us is about curing some of the minor deficiencies in an otherwise defensible, reasonable, and necessary regulation. The fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments represented an enormous step forward when it passed 3 years ago, and it's still a very good law. Our victories have emboldened other jurisdictions to look at the risks that their communities face from spills, explosions, and natural disasters, and to begin to regulate the many dangers of the fossil fuel industries in their homes. So in January of this year, King County, Washington passed a moratorium on new fossil fuel projects and will likely adopt permanent restrictions in coming months. In Vermont and New York State, there are bills introduced for a moratoria on all new fossil fuel infrastructure. These and other efforts are inspired by and directly utilize language from the Portland Amendments. Even closer to home, the Port of Vancouver recently made it binding policy to not allow new bulk fossil fuel terminals. This is an extraordinary development because it came just 1 year after the largest oil by rail export facility on the West Coast was rejected by Washington state regulators and Governor Jay Inslee in Vancouver. City of Portland has an important role to play in the energy transition beyond the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments. Your collaboration with Multnomah County on a fossil fuel risk assessment and your commitment to further health and safety policy are welcome steps. Moving forward, as we continue to innovate locally, as we must also push hard on our state legislatures toward a statewide moratorium on new fossil fuel infrastructure and for a framework for a managed but rapid decline of the fossil fuel industry in line with a 100% renewable energy-powered economy. Portland has showed that cities can lead with direct and effective fossil fuel infrastructure policy. The community has showed up in the streets, in the halls of government, and at the ballot to demonstrate overwhelming support for strong climate action. We support the readoption of the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. We appreciate it. Next three, please, Carla.
Are Kelly O'Hanley, Ella Schreiner, Violet O'Haron, and they'll be followed by Robert Boyer, Micah Mescal, and Melanie Plout.
Good afternoon. Would you like to start, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. Kelly O'Hanley. I'm speaking on behalf of Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us speak. As we've heard this afternoon, if we don't act quickly on a global scale, climate change will become essentially unsolvable. Technically, it is possible to move away from climate-busting fossil fuels. And so the real question is, how do we get there? How do we make that happen? And that's where politics come in. And unlike other political fights, balanced and measured answers will fail us. So we need so-called radical solutions. Happily, there are some rays of hope. When Trump pulled out of the climate accords, he explained that he'd been elected to govern Pittsburgh, not Paris. But the next day, the mayor of Pittsburgh said that his town was planning on 100% renewable energy, a pledge that was taken up by other cities. Cities and counties across the country are suing Exxon, BP, Chevron, Shell, and others to pay for seawalls and other infrastructure. And then there's Portland. We also passed the 100% renewable resolution, and we've acted even more radically. We passed in the landmark No Fossil Fuels Infrastructure Resolution. We fought and won the legal challenge to it, and hopefully today we'll pass the zoning code amendments. And the eyes of the country have been watching. Milwaukee, Oregon, Eugene, Corvallis, Hood River, Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, BC, Los Angeles, Richmond, California, Baltimore, Honolulu are all considering or have actually passed their own versions. So what's next for Portland? Today, hopefully, we'll proudly celebrate no new fossil fuel infrastructure. Tomorrow, we'll take additional radical steps for reinvention, hopefully addressing transportation, mass transit, risk bonding, use of forest products, building codes, and so on. In other words, every aspect of our lives that affect climate. So Portland, keep leading and move fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Ella Schreiner. I'm 17 years old, and I was born and raised in Portland. I'm also a founding member of the Portland Youth Climate Council, but today I'm speaking to you as a concerned individual. This morning, I was at home thinking about what I wanted to say to you today. I thought I would focus on the risks fossil fuel infrastructure poses to our public health and safety as well as our environment. I wanted my testimony to have facts, and I wanted to say the perfect thing that would make it clear to you how important these zoning amendments are and how important it is that they just be the beginning of our rapid journey to dismantling fossil fuel infrastructure in Portland. But as I sat, hands poised above the keys, waiting for inspiration to strike, I broke down into tears. The truth is, I don't know what I could say that could make it clear. What I could say that would make you and move you as leaders to take the necessary and ongoing actions. If leaders around the world are not stepping up because doing so would threaten their financial support from the very corporations that are responsible for this crisis, I don't know what I could say. If millions of young people have striked from school and marched together screaming for action without sufficient response, I don't know what I could say. If a growing number of climate refugees facing the loss of their home and even death doesn't move us to action, I don't know what I could say. If polar ice melt, ocean acidification, sea level rise, devastating fires, climate-enhanced heat waves, Arctic blasts, tornadoes, and other extreme weather events are not enough for us to change, then I just don't know what I could say. One of the things I hear most as a climate activist is, wow, when I was your age, I wasn't doing anything like you're doing. When I hear that, I always think, well, that's because when you were my age, you didn't have to. The reality is we've never before faced a crisis like the one we're in. This moment in time calls for all of us to step out of our comfort zones and do things we've never done before. We need to take risks. Mayor Wheeler, I remember you told me about your daughter when I delivered a video to you about the danger of natural gas back when you were the state treasurer. Do you ever find yourself thinking about how fast she's grown up?
I do.
How it feels like just yesterday that you were watching her take her first steps, say her first words. And how old is she now? 12, 13? Well, she was born more years ago than we have left to take drastic action. If we don't, her fate, my fate, and the fates of the rest of our and future generations will be sealed. 4 years ago, I testified as a 13-year-old in favor of the resolution that led to these zoning amendments. Commissioner Fritz, you may remember the little middle schooler singing "The Times They Are Changing" and presenting you with Climate Champion Awards.
Up in my office.
Those were hopeful times. But I'm not a middle schooler anymore, and I, along with thousands of my peers, are preparing to cast our first votes. The times, they really are changing, and we're watching to see if all of you are willing to take the risks that this time demands. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you. Good
Hello,
afternoon.
Commissioners. My name is Violet O'Haron. I'm a member of the Portland Youth Climate Council and a 7th grader at Ockley Green Middle School in North Portland. I want to start by saying thank you. It makes me feel hopeful to know the City of Portland is actively working on climate solutions. There's no single, simple solution to the climate crisis. It is clear, however, that there is no way we can solve the problem unless we stop building more fossil fuel facilities and drastically decrease the amount of fossil fuels we're using. The city's law to ban new fossil fuel infrastructure is a really good start. All of us need to do something. Having a future on a planet with a livable climate was something my parents were able to take for granted when they were growing up. I don't get that luxury. My generation doesn't get that luxury. I have a deep desire for things to be okay with the world, but I know things are not. My concern that not enough is being done has led me to go on climate strike every Friday here at City Hall. I'm inspired by Greta Thunberg and by her example of how much one young person can do. I'm also working together with other young people at Portland Youth Climate Council to advocate for local climate solutions. I'm trying to do what I can do. I want to challenge everyone here to ask themselves, what more can you do? For the commissioners, I think stopping the export of tar sands through Zenith would be a good next step. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Commissioner Hardesty.
I just want to appreciate the two young people who came in and testified. The young woman who said when she was 13 when she testified the first time, I can assure you that at 13, the thought of going to Salem to testify at a legislative hearing would not have been in my worldview. And I want to tell that other young lady, what a fabulous job you did. I knew you were nervous when you came up, but I got to tell you, your voice didn't shake at all, and you had very powerful testimony. Thank you so, so much for being here.
Next three, please, Carla.
are Robert Boyer, Micah Mescal, and Melanie Plout, and they'll be followed by Monica Zazuda, Ryan Rittenhouse, and Edith Gillis.
Would you like to go ahead and start for us, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Council and Mayor, my name's Micah Mescal, and I work for Portland Audubon. Portland Audubon has been advocating on issues regarding the Northwest Industrial Area for over 40 years. We've known for a long time that many of the industries located along the river posed a huge risk to our environment and our community. And this is especially true for the fossil fuel terminals. And that's why we're here today to support the readoption. Situated in a liquefaction zone between two of our city's most important natural resources, Forest Park and the Willamette River, is less than ideal. With these facilities built before the current building code and seismic standards were in place. This places our public and private investments in the Superfund cleanup and Forest Park restoration at great risk. As important, or more important, it also puts adjacent neighborhoods like Linton and St. John's at risk as well, but also downstream communities, local workers, and communities along the infrastructure that services these facilities like pipelines and rail lines. And many of this infrastructure intersects through low-income and communities of color in North and Northeast Portland. Several years ago, alongside our coalition partners, we helped push this policy forward. We worked collaboratively with the city to help shape it. We helped defend it in court when the oil industry and the Portland Business Alliance challenged it. And today we are here to give support for the proposed amendments and readoption. The reinstatement of this ordinance is an important step by the city in re-implementing the grassroots-led vision to protect our community and environment from additional fossil fuel infrastructure. And it must be followed by additional, more ambitious steps if we are to further mitigate the extensive risks of existing fossil fuel infrastructure located along the Willamette River throughout the city of Portland. We are happy to hear today about the ongoing work that the city is undergoing. And as you see, we are here to support you and to get behind your leadership, and we will also be here to hold you accountable to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, Mayor and Council. I am Melanie Plout. I'm speaking today for 350 PDX. Deneen O'Rourke, who's on the staff there, was unable to come because she's ill.
Oh, that's too bad.
3 years ago, then Mayor Charlie Hales said before making the vote unanimous, I am really proud to be a Portlander, and I am really proud to preside over this city council. I vote aye. The chamber erupted in cheers. In fact, Deneen, who was working on the East Coast in New England, said that it was meaningful to her, too, all the way across the country when council passed this amendment the first time. So the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendment was groundbreaking. I would like to think that cities can still lead, so I add my voice to those who support the council in reinstituting this code. In the intervening 3 years, much has happened. The climate crisis has accelerated more rapidly than the most pessimistic estimates. Weather changes, floods, droughts, and wildfires have made it hard for even those who profit from the fossil fuel industry to deny that climate change is occurring. And yet, the federal government and state government seem unable to take action commensurate with the crisis. What you do, this council, gives us hope and has proven to be a model for other jurisdictions. Here in Portland, we are even more aware than we were 3 years ago of the risks posed by the tanks and trains in the critical energy hub. In 3 years, trains across the country have derailed, pipelines have leaked, and tanks have exploded. And you know that here in Portland, we have unique safety risks, which I think Mike Myers outlined more eloquently than anyone else could. This means that not only is it permissible, as determined by the courts, for the city to take action on the new bulk fuel storage code, it is the only moral option. The transition to renewables has started, though not yet fast enough. To stand a chance of meeting the city's goals for 100% renewable energy, we will need to greatly accelerate the expansion. It makes less and less sense to build anything new that supports fossil fuel use when what we really need is the rapid transition off fossil fuels. We can do this, we just need to do it faster, and we can't go backward. The fossil fuel zoning amendment is like insurance against backsliding. This code is a crucial step, yet in itself is not enough, as others have said, and we look forward to the discussed actions that the city can take. The first step today, however, is to complete what began in this room 3 years ago. We ask you to continue to stand strong in the face of the fossil fuel industry and the push to maintain the status quo. Remember, cities lead, make us proud again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm Bob Boyer. I love Portland, and I've been here at the Air Base in 1961, before a lot of people in here were born or in elementary school. I worked on the waterfront over 40 years. I was president of the union that run the tugboats. I had no idea when I worked at the shipyard sandblasting and painting ships that we were polluting the river. So I want to help clean it up. Right now, I sit on the board of property tax appeal for Multnomah County, convincing people why their property tax are at that rate. And here we're sitting on a time bomb. So I decided to do a little research. I also was a yard foreman for the Southern Pacific Railroad, and before that I laid track. We have derailments in Mosier. Suppose that were oil cars that went into the river. This heavy oil sinks right down to the bottom. I'm in support of 1082. I'm here to support you. As a yard foreman, I have seen derailments. We just had one at the Albina Yard in North Portland with a remote engines. So by having 4 generations here in Portland, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and myself, I love Portland. And for that reason alone, I put my hand up to protect this country when I went in the Air Force. I put my hand up to protect the state when I was a state senator. I've been active and created the neighborhood associations so the citizens could have a voice, and for the mayor and the city council to recognize us. I love Portland. I'm here to support you, and some of you already know me. I mean what I say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thanks, all 3 of you. Next 3, please, Carla.
Are Monica Zazueta, Ryan Rittenhouse, and Edith Gillis, and they'll be followed by Doran Burrell, Tara Ota, and Nick Caleb.
Do you want to go ahead and start?
Anybody?
Go ahead.
I'm Edith Gillis, and I'm saying we need to brand crude oil till safe, effective firefighting foam is on site, ban tar sands oil till Zenith pays worst-case costs to the county and city, refundable 30 years after the end of its use and its cleanup, require oil transport, storage, refining, and use to supply their own safe fire foam, and I want you to realize that there has never been invented any firefighting foam that is effective, prompt, thorough, or safe, or that's ever been cleaned up from the environment. Every firefighting foam that has ever been used continues in the bodies and in the children and progeny of those who have used it, in the environment, and all the species that have been studied in the environment. It affects over 800, it's been proven to cause over 800 serious diseases, disabilities, and deaths. And it's in every single system of the human body. It continues for generations. Don't allow tar sands oil in Portland or the surrounding waters until its owners and transporters prove through reliable third parties that they have adequate fire and explosion prevention, prompt, thorough suppression with effective, safe, environmentally beneficial products and processes, with each train, tank, terminal, ship, and along the routes, paid for by the owners. Make sure that their firefighting crews on staff have the adequate training, supplies, and lifetime for several generations of disability payments. Please read The Intercept, October 24th, 2019 article. The top U.S. toxicologist was barred from saying PFAS caused disease in humans. She's saying it now. After her entire 40 career of study, Dr. Linda Burnham retired from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, 19 years with the EPA, and the National Toxicology Program director, says that firefighting foams are unsafe and harmful. The chemicals known as PFAS, or polyacyl and polyalkyl substances, persist in the environment and affect every system in the human body. Don't allow the cause or the need for it until you've proved what we have is safe to deal with it.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty had a comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Edith, I want you to know that one of the things that we're looking at is whether or not we can require these industries to have their own firefighting personnel and equipment. What we know is that if we have a major incident in this energy hub, is that our firefighters have not been trained, nor are we equipped to fight the kind of fire that these oil refineries, these oil tanks would have, right? So know that we're working on it, right? We're working on it.
We require fire extinguishers, and if they can't come up with a fire extinguisher to put it out, they don't have it.
Well, you know, Edith, I'm not mad at you because that's one of the first things I thought. I do not want to send my personnel into a situation that they have not been well-trained or have the appropriate equipment to respond to. But they would go because that's what they do. That's not acceptable. So thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Monica Zazueta. I'm from Vancouver, Washington. I'm a wife and I'm a mother of a beautiful 5-year-old son named Aries Tabor. Before 2 months ago, I was wrapped up in my own world and didn't watch much news and didn't know what the government really did or what the City Council did or what the Port of Vancouver did. I just didn't educate myself on any of those matters because I didn't think they mattered to me. This morning, I rewatched a video of Greta Thunberg speaking to the UN. That was the video that changed everything about my life. I remember feeling scared and confused and shocked. How could we not have known about this? Why weren't we pulling away from fossil fuels as soon as possible if our very own lives were at stake? I wanted to know more on what was really happening to the planet, our home, and wanting to plug in and try to help any way that I could. I didn't know what I could do, but I had to do something. Every day, the truth became more and more clear in the workshops, trainings, and the meetings that I was attending. Sierra Club Lewitt and Sunrise Hub of Vancouver, Washington were the two groups I found. Their support and actions were inspiring, and we all were working towards the same thing, to save our generations and the generations to come. I am a mother, and when I start to think there's a big possibility that he might be living a miserable life with unbearable temperatures, earthquakes, hurricanes, and so much more, it breaks my heart. The stress, the anxiety, the fear, the anger, all come up when I think about the climate crisis. I promised my son that I would try my best to take care of him, and I'm going to try to keep that promise. I urge the council to reinstate the ordinance and continue to stand strong against fossil fuel companies. The work has just begun, so I want to let you know I want to tell you all that I'm here to stand with you. Vancouver, Washington is here to stand with you, and Portland is here to stand with you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. You know we're going to win this fight, right?
Yes,
We're gonna win it.
Yes, we are.
Thank you
We
for
are.
being here.
We don't have an alternative.
No.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting us testify today. My name is Ryan Rittenhouse. I work for Friends of the Columbia Gorge.
Thank you.
So with that name probably comes to mind Mosier and the oil train disaster that happened there, which is very pertinent to this conversation. One of the things I'd like to remind folks about that disaster is one of the reasons it wasn't much worse than it was. As bad as it could have been much worse. And one of the reasons it wasn't worse was because the train wasn't moving very quickly. Union Pacific is currently, right now, and actually before that disaster even happened, had already started the process of trying to expand their siding right through the town of Mosier for the express purpose of raising the speed of the trains to pass through that area. If they are successful at getting that expansion through as they want it, they will be able to increase the speed of those trains to 60 miles an hour. The speed of the train that derailed in Lac Mégantic, Quebec, and destroyed the town was running away at 65 miles an hour. So you can imagine how much worse that disaster in Mosier would have been if it was moving at 60 miles an hour rather than, I forget exactly what it was moving at. It was very, very slow. Also, a quick note, I know I don't have much time, but a quick note on the biofuels issue. As you know, we're very concerned with the Zenith terminal, also Global Partners, all of the oil trains that serve those facilities, most of the oil trains that serve the facilities in California, and of course the ones up in the Puget Sound, all of them come through the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area. And while we recognize that it's important to allow certain kinds of biofuels perhaps in the future, those should be de-incentivized in favor of truly renewable resources, especially because the fossil fuel industry is very savvy and very good at manipulating laws and loopholes. We've seen that. You're very familiar with them over the Zenith terminal. And I'm worried that in the future, they may try this again with biofuel terminals. So it needs to be very clear, and we're going to need to maintain very extreme diligence over any such terminals that get approved in the future to make sure that the fossil fuel industry doesn't figure out a way to come and buy that facility and flip it as they've done with Zenith and Global Partners. You've also heard probably a lot already, and you'll probably hear more in the future from the fossil fuel industry about how they want to do upgrades and how all of this is bad for them and bad for their economics. Well, just remember, you're not here to make their jobs easier or to make their business more profitable. You are here to protect the citizenry and the environment. And we're all here to dismantle the fossil fuel industry, not make it more profitable for them. To wrap up, this is just beginning. I'm glad to see you all recognizing that as such. We need to move forward, and this is a golden opportunity to make a just transition, not just for the environment, but for social justice. This is an opportunity to move towards more transit options, more accessibility along those lines. And just remember that every carbon atom that we dig out of the ground and put into the air is one that we got to take back out of the air and put back into the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Next three, please, Carla.
The last three who signed up are Doran Burrell, Nick Caleb, and Aaron Saylor.
All right. Nick, you want to go ahead and start? Sure. Thank you.
Greetings, Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler. My name is Nicholas Caleb. I'm the staff attorney for the Center for Sustainable Economy. I've been working on fossil fuel infrastructure campaigns and policymaking since about 2013. The original energy that brought this infrastructure fight to Portland Council has only grown over the years, as there's an increasing understanding among people throughout the world that the type of action Portland is taking must happen everywhere at once. I'm very pleased to see the fighting spirit for taking on the fossil fuel industry transcending several different councils. It is necessary given the opposition from an industry with near bottomless resources. Thank you, Commissioner Fritz, for being an early adopter of strong action, having a strong voice, and for your continued attention to these issues. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Udaley, for your votes to defend the amendments in court and support for remand. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for your strong advocacy on climate justice issues and for smart and necessary regulations to protect Portland's residents. We look forward to working with you on a managed decline of fossil fuel infrastructure, and I think we've got great momentum right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas. Appreciate it. Last but not least.
Good afternoon. My name is Erin Saylor. I'm a staff attorney with Columbia Riverkeeper. Thank you for providing us all with the opportunity to speak with you today. Industry has submitted testimony into the record arguing that adoption of the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments would prevent the development of renewable fuels. That is simply not the case. Biofuels are specifically exempted from the scope of the amendments, and Zenith's assertion that the city's recent denial of the request to build 3 new pipes under Northwest Front Avenue, ostensibly for biofuels, was the result of the city's resolution against the expansion of fossil fuel terminals completely ignores the rest of the city's decision, which was clearly tied to Zenith's past performance performance under its franchise agreement. Companies who want to construct infrastructure dedicated solely to renewable fuels will not be prevented from doing so under these amendments. Companies who choose to handle both fossil fuels and renewable fuels at the same facility are not only free to, but encouraged to reduce the amount of fossil fuels stored at their facilities in order to increase the amount of renewable fuels that they can store. Industry's argument that these amendments will prevent them from completing seismic upgrades also falls flat. There are other ways for them to complete the upgrades without building new temporary storage tanks. It's a total red herring for them to argue that these incredibly important amendments will prevent them from completing these necessary upgrades. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that complete public testimony, Carla?
Yes, that's all who signed up.
Colleagues, do we want to bring staff up for any additional questions? Then let's get on with it. Carla, please call the roll.
I'm sorry, Robert, did you have a?
Sorry, Mayor. We would like you to please keep the record for written testimony open until 9 a.m. Monday, December 2nd.
Why?
To allow staff to complete their work.
What's the work that they need to complete? Could you come up and clarify that for us, please?
Yes, Mayor, if you will. You know, one of the issues that we got dinged on by LUBA is not fully considered and responding to all of the testimony. A number of testimony has come in this afternoon into our website. So I guess to put us in a better defensive position, we want that time to be able to review the testimony over the holiday and to respond to it on the record before you guys make a decision.
Well, we've certainly waited this long, a few more weeks, and it gives you something to do over the holidays.
That's right.
How nice. Commissioner Fritz, did you have any comment?
I was just going to suggest that since all of our wonderful constituents are here, that we could each make our comments now so you don't have to come back next time. You can if you want, because it's really nice to see you. But would that be all right?
That would be fine. Why don't we just go down the row? Commissioner Daly?
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't always feel that Portland deserves its progressive green reputation, but I'm proud of our city and our city council today. Earlier today, we passed an item that clears the way for a mobility hub in the Central East Side for electric cars, bikes, and scooters. We're also taking action and investing in improving our public transit system. These are just a couple of ways we can combat climate change through sustainable transportation options, where we've given preference to single-occupant, gas-powered vehicles in the past. This ordinance is the flip side of these actions. While we make sustainable options more viable, we must carefully regulate and restrict industries and practices that endanger our people and our planet. Thank you to the Council of 2016, especially my colleagues, Commissioner Fritz and Fish. Thank you to our office and city staff and attorneys who do the hard work of turning our values, priorities, and aspirations into strong, defendable policies. And most of all, thank you to community activists, advocates, and organizations. We wouldn't be here without you today, and we need you to keep pushing us to do better.
I was waiting for to be called upon, but we're just going down. That's right. We have to not vote aye at the end. I'll have to remember that because we have, of course, want to make good findings before doing our vote. Sometimes people think that a remand from the Land Use Board of Appeals is a bad thing. In this particular instance, it means that we get to vote on this ordinance, we get to vote on this ordinance, we're going to get to vote on it again. And I think I feel really blessed that we have that opportunity because it is a really important thing that we did and that we are doing, and then we're going to do even more. And so I appreciate that my colleagues who didn't have that joyful experience in 2016 are getting to have it now. Thank you. I'd forgotten about the paper streamers. That's such a good, oh yes, it's really great. Thank you. And I also especially appreciate the young person from Ockley Green who said that each one of us needs to think about what more can we do. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands if you took transit or walked or biked to get here, but every single day in everything we do, we need to be thinking about how can I do more. Commissioner Novick, who you'll remember was a strong supporter of this policy, texted me a few months ago to tell me about the energy use of clothes dryers, tumble dryers. And that's the most energy consumptive, one of the most energy consumptive things in our homes. And so I am now hanging up my clothes to dry on a nice line that I've got. So I wouldn't have thought of doing that without the commissioner doing it. It's a very simple thing. It takes a day to dry the clothes instead of an hour. But if that's something that can help stop getting millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, if everybody in America did it, why would we not want to do that? So again, and if people want to email me with further suggestions on things that could be done that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of, I'm really interested. I think we all should be interested in what more can I do, rather than as well as what more should the government be doing, because it's clear that the cities are going to have to lead. Our federal government is letting us all down badly. Each one of us can make a difference. So thank you so much, each of you, for being here.
I want to echo the thanks. I just love when this chamber is filled from top to bottom. I love when this chamber is filled with people of all ages and all backgrounds. I love it especially when we're all here for a common cause. It's always good to have the other side, but clearly there is no other side when we're talking about saving the planet, right? And the inhabitants of the planet. I take this issue very seriously because my role as managing 3 of the 4 first responder bureaus at the city of Portland means my folks are on the front line of this every single day. When a bad thing happens, my folks will be the one that will show up no matter what. And they will show up and they will do the best job they can possibly do. We have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure that we are not putting public servants in harm's way, and that people who know that their products cause harm and will destroy communities have an obligation to remediate the harm that's done. So I, as part of the Regional Disaster Preparedness Board, got talk about a reality check recently at one of our meetings when there was, like a 60-second video? I mean, it's a very short video that actually took pictures of all the tankers and just kind of had a helicopter flying around and giving you a visual. And when you see it from the air, what you see is that these are very, 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 very old tanks that you would think are probably leaking. If they're not leaking today, they leaked sometime in the past. And so this action that we're going to take whenever this comes back to the city council is just one small piece of all the pieces that we have to do to address climate change. No one here wants to see the disaster happen because of the, even if it's working the way it's supposed to, disasters could happen. And so we have an obligation to make sure that we are protecting the health and safety of not just public servants, but also the public in general. So I appreciate each and every one of you for making the time to be here today. And I would encourage you to not just show up and talk about this when it's on the agenda, but this is something that we have to talk about every single day until we address the big issues that are on the table. Thank you.
So I don't have a well-thought-out speech, so I'm going to wing it. Bear with me. Number one, thank you for everybody who showed up today to testify. I thought it was fantastic testimony. This has really been a good day overall for the council in terms of very, very high-quality testimony. I learned a lot from everything that you said, and I appreciate it. Number two, I was proud to publicly endorse and support the ordinance when it came before the City Council in 2016, but I did not have the opportunity to vote for it. And so I'm glad that I'm going to have the opportunity to vote for it here, not today, but in the near future, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Number three, the sense of urgency here is obvious and has been mentioned many times. Cities have to lead. The federal government, the Trump administration, they are now working against us in terms of our efforts to address climate change on this planet. And I was very proud to have recently gone to the C40 Global Mayors the Mayor's Global Climate Summit in Copenhagen. And that was an opportunity for me to interact with mayors and leaders and heads of state from all around the world. And the overall message there was, we are still in, and we are more aggressive than we've ever been in terms of addressing our climate action goals. And I have to say this, as an envoy from the city of Portland, Portland is very much regarded as a global leader when it comes to the issue of the environment and climate action. And I want to second what Commissioner Udaley said earlier about how proud she is about the actions this council has taken recently. I am too. And in effect, we are now backing up a whole host of very specific strategies that we can take as a city, and you'll be learning more about that in the weeks and the months ahead, and I'm very glad about that. On a cautionary note front, the whole issue of oil trains going through our community bothers me on many fronts. The first is the obvious one, which is the environmental and public health and public safety front. And somebody alluded to the crash in Quebec some number of years ago, and I just want to reiterate that that crash killed over 4 dozen people, and it burned half the town to the ground. And then shortly thereafter, we had the derailment of 96 fossil fuel cars in Mosier, which could have been an environmental, a public health, and a public safety catastrophe had things turned out just a little bit differently. And then, as Commissioner Hardesty mentioned, and as others mentioned during their testimony, we had an oil train going through the rail yards here in our central city, and at a very low rate of speed, the train still managed to hit an overpass and derail. And if that had happened in a more typical scenario with a more regular speed, who knows what the outcome could have been. But from my perspective, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that having oil trains going through natural habitats and then through densely populated neighborhoods is not a safe, environmentally sound strategy, nor is it in the best interests of the public health. And if we're not here to protect those things, why else would we possibly be here? And so I am proud to have this opportunity to support this fossil fuel ordinance. I'm very glad that Robert is, I think, the best public sector legal counsel we can possibly have on these issues. And we're right. At every step, let's dot the I's, let's cross the T's. Let's make sure that once we do this, it's done, and we're not going to have to bring it back and do it again. So we are done with oral testimony. The record for written testimony is going to remain open until 9 a.m. on Monday, December 2nd. That means if anybody wants to submit an email, please submit an email. Your testimony must be received by the council clerk by 9 a.m. to be included in the official record. At that time, the record will be closed. This ordinance, therefore, is continued until Wednesday, December 18th at 3 p.m. time certain. If you want to be here, that's great, you can be. When the council reconvenes, there is the opportunity, should commissioners wish, to introduce amendments. At that time, the council will determine whether additional public testimony is warranted for any proposed amendments. And the council may, if it so chooses, to reopen the record for the limited purpose of testimony on the amendments at that time. Is there any other business, colleagues? Then this hearing is continued to Wednesday, December 18th at 3 p.m. time certain. Thank you, everyone, for showing up, and we are adjourned.